G'day, mate. Luke Ford here. We're talking once again with my friend Richard. We're talking about a book that came out in 2017, I believe, or at least one version of it did. It's called Alone Together, where we expect more from technology and less from each other. It's by Sherry Turkle, has a background in psychology and psychoanalysis. And I'm going to get us started here with some cutting edge insights. So, okay, this book first came out in 2010. Now, here's one typical sentence from the book. We are lonely but fearful of intimacy. And my first question is she talking about herself? Is she lonely? Is she fearful of intimacy? Or has she overcome these challenges of technology? Are people like her just so together that they don't experience a massive increase in loneliness since the development of smartphones? She's just so smart and mature and competent and adult that she can handle technology, but the plebs just can't handle technology. So she says we are lonely but fearful of intimacy, but I don't recall her confessing in the book how lonely and fearful of intimacy she is. And if she's not lonely, if she's not fearful of intimacy, if she has the same technology as the regular person, how is she above and beyond all the problems that the people in her book have? Any thoughts, Richard?
Wow. Let's not get controversial or anything. Let's not get personal. That's actually an interesting question. My sense is that she's someone who has, because she's a psychologist and because of the world she lives in, has probably done a lot of the work to mature herself as a person. A lot of the people that she studies, and I mean, the book is pretty much, an aggregation of all the different studies she did and her conclusions from those about how we deal with technology. She dealt with kids, grade school children, K through 12. She dealt with college students, and she dealt with older people and with elderly people. She has a pretty good spectrum, but it's often the difficulty with studies like this is they do tend to fall within certain, certain limitations, because she talks a lot about college students and high school students, and they're not mature by and large. They don't have the kind of maturity that, just from reading it, just from the things she's talked about, like she mentions, the time she spends just in self-reflection, getting to know herself, and she's pretty honest about her struggles with technology. She finds herself doing things that she's surprised with, and her frustration with her daughter not being able to maybe have as much conversation as she would like to have. So I think, she doesn't talk about that directly because she's coming at this, I think, like a scientist and as a clinical psychologist and a sociologist. And so she's kind of bringing it from that perspective, what's the effect on the individual, but what's the expand that to the macro, what's the effect on society as a whole? And so she's looking at it from both those perspectives. I think at least that's what I came away with from reading the book.
I mean, there's this whole genre on how technology is destroying our lives, how technology is making us lonely, how technology is just wreaking havoc. But it never applies to all the people who are commenting. It never applies to all the people who are making this case. There was this big Netflix documentary on how technology is ruining our lives, and it had interviews with all these tech experts. But none of the tech experts thought that technology was ruining their lives. It's like those people who want to claim that pornography causes rape. Well, somehow it doesn't cause them to rape. It's only the lesser beings who are driven to rape. So there's this whole genre of books about we are doomed, that technology is destroying us, but somehow all the people who have this hustle, all the people who are making a living from telling us that we're doomed, all the doomsayers, all the people who are calling us attention to these giant problems, they rarely say, "Oh, it's ruining my life." It's usually not even brought up. Somehow everyone else can navigate it. And I got to tell you, Richard, I use technology. I have a smartphone, and I experience loneliness probably less than 0.1% of the time. And the issues that she talks about in this book, I almost never see in my life because I am blessed to have functional people in my life. Now, I have seen these issues kind of on the periphery of my life or in the past where I'd see a husband and a wife and they'd be far more interested in their cell phone than in each other. But no one in my life today do I see that going on. And so it seems like she is focusing on, like, there's this whole genre focusing on how technology is destroying us. But it seems to me, Richard, that at the fundamental core of this problem is that dysfunctional people will display ever expanding ways of being dysfunctional. But everyone I know in my life overwhelmingly does not have these problems. But dysfunctional people, yeah, they will retreat to technology rather than interacting with people. But think about the people you know well in your life. Are they devastated by loneliness because of their smartphones?
Well, okay, let me put that in perspective. I appreciate that observation, and there's some consistency with my own experience, but part of that is because I'm a person who's seeking emotional maturity. I'm a person who's dedicated in a very serious way to doing that. And so, you attract what you are. So, the fact that I'm in 12 step and I'm surrounded by people who, want to understand why they behave the way they do, who are, actively looking at that. And because, I choose to have people like that in my life because I prefer those sorts of people, I've already sort of segregated the level of experience that I have. Now, you could probably take that same notion and apply that to Sherry Turkle. She's viewing this from the standpoint of going into schools, going into nursing homes, and seeing how people respond to technology. And so what she's shared really kind of brings that out. I think it's dangerous to project, for example, for me to project my own experience of the world on everybody else. Now, you could probably say, I think your question really is Sherry Turkle doing that? And I think, to be fair, I think there's enough objective information and studies that she's done, because she's just not saying this off the cuff. She's got 30 years of research behind this. So there are clearly issues in relation to this, at least in my experience. But in my personal daily life, because of the way I choose to live, I tend not to surround myself with people who are living the way that she describes people. But I know it for a fact, because I hear from other people in their conversations and the frustrations that they have, that in fact these things are happening.
Yeah, I'm absolutely sure it happens to many, many people, because fundamentally dysfunctional people who are unable to connect normally with other people, they're going to manifest that dysfunction in myriad ways. Some of them are going to be addicted to gaming. Some are going to be addicted to alcohol. Some are going to be addicted to pornography. Some are going to be addicted to sports. I mean, there are all sorts of ways that you can distract yourself. And there were times in my life when I was lonely. And when I was lonely, I would sometimes act in a bizarre fashion, or I would spend too much time watching TV, or I would manifest my dysfunction in many different ways. But once you're connected to people, then I find that these problems start to go away. So that's my own experience. Once I'm feeling connected to others, my desire to act out in bizarre and destructive and socially destructive ways just considerably diminishes. So
absolutely, of course, and that's really kind of the whole point. Can we do something for a minute? Let's kind of get an understanding of what we mean by loneliness, and I want to put it in the context, because to me, the context of this book is about the effect that technology has on us. In fact, one of her quotes: "We have to love our technology enough to describe it accurately, and we have to love ourselves enough to confront technology's true effects on us." And I think she explores that question pretty well. And I think we're kind of right now is kind of skirting the surface of that and really not digging
Okay,
into
could
that.
you repeat what you just read?
Yeah, we have to love our technology enough to describe it accurately, and we have to love ourselves enough to confront technology's true effects on us. And you know, she talked. There's another really good one here. Um,
Here, why don't you address that quote that you just read? Why don't you offer some thoughts on the quote that you just read, and then I'll offer some thoughts, and then we can go on to another quote.
well, technology is here to stay. The internet's not going away. That's not going to happen. Um, and the way technology affects us, you know, she spends a lot of time talking about the effect that texting has on that. Now, I saw in your notes that, you know, you don't text a lot.
Right.
Fine. I know that most school kids that I know, and then who have parents, they do somewhere between 2 and 6,000 texts a month.
Wow.
So what one of the things that she points out is that technology, when you're using it in that way, the effect that she sees, and she's seeing this as a psychologist. Now, admittedly, a psychologist probably tends to see more sick people than she does seem to see well people. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
that, you know, that may skew that, and I can appreciate that. But the technology is still affecting us in a particular way. You know, I have to be conscious. For example, I know one time I joked with you. My wife and I sit on the couch, and she's, you know, on her Kindle, and I'm on my phone, and we're doing different things. You know, and that's exactly what she's talking about. You know, that's her idea of alone together, or that's one of the facets of that I think she's getting at, and what are the implications long term for our culture and how we relate to each other.
Okay, hang on. Let's just unpack that example you said where
Sure.
you're on one device and your wife is on another, and then you repeated the title of the book, Alone Together. Are you any more alone together than if you were each reading separate books? I've often been alone with my girlfriend, and we're each reading separate books, and there's no loneliness there. We're each absorbed in different books. So perhaps we need to define loneliness, and I'm going to
Exactly.
define loneliness is erratic thinking. Because when you're alone and you feel good, you feel fine, you're enjoying your alone time, your thought process is going to be smooth. So that's not loneliness. I enjoy a lot of downtime where it's just me reading books or writing. And if my thought process is smooth, then that's not loneliness. That's just wonderful time on my own. Now, I also occasionally experience, and in the past have more often experienced, erratic thinking, where I can't settle down to one thing because I'm not getting the human connection that I need, because I am feeling lonely, because I am jarred and jangly and disconnected. So I know what loneliness feels like. It is not a smooth thought process. It's you're disconnected. You can't settle down and happily do one thing. That's my definition of loneliness. And I'm going to wager that when you and your wife are on different devices, that in and of itself is no more significant than if you were reading different books or if you're engaging in different tasks in the same room. It's only if you're disconnected from your wife and you're not able to absorb yourself in the device because you're ill at ease, because your thoughts are not smooth, that you're feeling lonely. That's the problem. That's my thought.
Yeah, and I like she actually gives a fairly good definition of loneliness. What she says is loneliness is failed solitude.
Yeah.
To experience and this is what you were talking about, and by the way, I agree with what you said in terms of, you know, she says to experience solitude, you must be able to summon yourself by yourself. Otherwise, you will only know how to be lonely. In his History of Solitude, Anthony Storr writes about the importance of being able to feel at peace in one's own company. And that's another way of describing that, just being comfortable in your own skin, just going, hey, I don't have to seek out this, I don't have to seek out that. I have a peaceful mindset. I can be by myself and enjoy my thoughts and enjoy that solitude. And part of what allows that to happen, I think, and I suspect you'd agree, is that because I've done the work to have good relationships. I mean, I have a great relationship with my wife. So in fact, for me, and when we do that, it is that rather than me being up in my office, and her being downstairs, doing what she's doing, I said, well, let's go to the living room. We'll do it together. We'll do it in the same room so we can be in each other's presence and just enjoy being with each other. It doesn't really require um, direct interaction because we have plenty of that. I mean, we really do have plenty of that. Now, what she's focusing on is the effect that the technology and those sorts of things have on people who haven't done that work, who don't have those relationships, and in fact, who use the technology to hide from relationships. That's what she's getting at, and I think that's a very real trend.
Yeah, let me just share a little bit about my experience of loneliness because I have known lonely days and lonely nights. I am a 55-year-old bachelor, so when I feel lonely, this is what I notice about when I feel lonely. There is a lethargy often. I am ill at ease. I am restless, irritable, and discontented, to use big book language. I can't settle down productively and happily at a task. And often there's just a yearning for attention or for distraction from food, from pleasure seeking, TV, fantasies of grandiosity. So I spent much of my life dulling the feelings of loneliness that I had by absorbing myself in fantasies of my becoming an incredibly great, powerful, famous, influential person one day, making everyone else then, sit up and pay attention to how amazing I am. So that's my experience of loneliness. I don't know. Do you have any history with loneliness, and how would you deal with it?
It's been a long time since I've experienced that kind of anxiety. I have other relational issues that I have dealt with, but it doesn't show up like loneliness in the way that you described. Because actually, I was raised an only child. So I came to really actually enjoy being by myself and being creative by myself. And my parents kind of, they were there enough for me. I didn't feel that I was missing anything. So I've never really had that that deep yearning sense of loneliness. I've just really never had it. I've
Really?
never,
I mean,
I've never,
that's
I've never,
that's
I've never
amazing.
really,
Yeah.
now I'm going to say this, and I'm going to go back to maybe a little bit of what she said, is that this idea of solitude is not something that's uncomfortable for me. I have been fortunate, and I know it's fortunate because I know a lot of people don't experience this. And I'm not bragging about it. I'm just being honest with what I experience. You know, it's been that because I've been, I was kind of raised without brothers and sisters and whatnot. But now there were some deficits from that, and where my relational deficits came from is my lack of skill in really understanding the consequences of my actions within relationships. That produced the addictions that I hid in because I didn't know how to deal with relationships, or because I needed to medicate the pain of them. But that didn't come from loneliness in that sense, in the sense of wishing I had other people. Um, I've been fortunate in that I always seem to have just about the right amount of people in my life and just about the right amount of time by myself. I can't necessarily even explain it, but
Okay.
that's, I
So
mean, to be, because the only way we can get at anything is to be honest about and transparent about what we experience. That's my experience, so I come to it with that perspective.
Okay, so how about, have you wrestled with, hey, I'm spending too much time on my phone, I'm spending too much time distracting myself with technology, I am hiding in my use of technology from other people? Has that been an issue? Let me ask myself, what did I just say? Have I spent too much time in technology? Yes. So I felt, okay, I need to spend more time with other people. My natural inclination is to spend more time alone than is good for me. So my natural inclination is that my interactions with other people have to be on my terms, and if I don't get it on my terms, then I'm just going to go do my own thing. So I naturally incline towards less social interaction than is good for me, and I can very much spend too much time in technology. And I like the feature on my iPhone that tells me how many times a day I pick up my phone. So I think I pick up my phone about 50 times a day, which is okay for me. I'm all right with that. And I spend about an hour to 2 hours a day on my phone, which I'm okay with. But sometimes I feel like, I have gone through phases where I would check Facebook too much, or I check my phone too much, or I just kind of look to my phone for some kind of endorphin hit. So I'm aware that I do have some tendencies in that direction. But what's your own experience with overuse of technology or hiding with tech?
That's a good question. I'd say my preferred, my drug of choice, my technology drug of choice is surfing the internet and research, and just finding stuff that I'm interested in, and bookmarking it, and or putting it in Evernote or whatever, and then maybe not going back and really doing anything with it, because you kind of get that dopamine hit when you find something that you're looking for. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's great. It's helpful to me when I do something with it. It's not necessarily helpful to me when I just collect it. And so for me, there is a certain pathology in how much I collect and how much I actually follow through with. That's one place that I have to be very careful. And I'd say that I'm still working through that. I've got a lot of notes in Evernote, and I've come to the point where I organize it pretty well, so I do a fairly good job with it. But it can be much better and much more accessible. And then, as I work on writing, and actually writing to and the research that's involved in that, I see how much improvement needs to be made, because not only do I need to be able to have it, but I need to be able to access it, and access it in a way that allows me to operate on, I guess, on demand. So when somebody needs something from me, I can bring it out and get it out quickly, or when I need something for my own purposes, that I can access at hand. To me, the definition of organization is being able to find something in 30 seconds or less. That's how I measure whether something's organized or not. Now, most of the things in my life are like that, but in terms of my research, I'm still still kind of ratting around like that.
I remember the last time I saw my father, and I had a pretty good idea that this would be the last time in my life that I saw my father. And it was 2014, something like June of 2014. And at the end of that interaction, as we were driving away, but probably the last 15 minutes of my time with my father on this earth, all I could think about was that I wasn't getting reception on my cell phone. So I gotta cop to that. And I knew this is going to be the last time you get to see your dad. And all I can think about is that I'm not getting reception on my phone. And it wasn't until about 15 minutes after we drove away that I finally got reception on my phone, and I was able to check my email, and then I was able to calm down. So I will admit, that's not a very impressive thing. That sometimes, like, that need for connectivity will overwhelm all other considerations. Like, if my computer does not work, or if I can't find my phone, maybe once every 3 years I misplace my phone, everything else just goes out the window. For 20, 30, 40 minutes, I am just frantic to find my phone. And if like the internet goes down for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I'm starting to crawl the walls. If my computer doesn't work, or my phone, God forbid, doesn't work, that just occupies all operating space in my mind. So I may think I'm sailing along just fine with technology, but it can just hit me out of the blue, and it's hard for me to adjust. I'm not sure if you have any experiences like that.
Oh yeah. Nothing sends me into paroxysms of you know, I actually had a friend of mine describe it to me. That's like one of the few areas when it doesn't work. When
Yeah.
everything's working, it's fine. And I'm working to not respond to that. But one of my friends said, "Yeah, you go from 0 to 100 if something doesn't work." Like I was, trying to figure out something at church and the sound system, and I couldn't hear what was going on. It's like, oh my God, it's not working. And I go like, yeah, can you help me out with this? And like, the truth is, I know this about myself. I go from 0 to, like frantic when I can't control it. And it's definitely a control thing. She talks about that a lot. She has a lot of different examples about that in a whole different variety of ways. So I think in that sense, for me, when I read this, I go, some of the circumstances or the situations she describes are different from mine, but the anxiety that I get when I lose my sense of my connection to something, because I'm very dependent on it. My wife needs to talk to me. It's a way that I connect to a lot of the things that matter to me. It's no different than if the power went out.
I remember I was on a date. I met this woman at synagogue. We went on a first date, and she kept taking calls, and I was
Mm-hmm.
ticked. And I'd
Oh
picked her
yeah.
up and given her a ride, so I was not going to just walk away and abandon her. But I was ticked, and that was it as far as I was concerned. Like, anyone who treats me like that, that's it. Now, she then tried to have a relationship with me, like, for the next 2 years. She would pursue me, but I was like, no way am I going to try to relate to someone who's on her phone. So people like that, I just drop them from my life. I mean, I will not put up with trying to have a conversation with someone who's constantly hopping on their phone. So, what are your experiences?
Well, um, hmm, I'm really thinking that there are times when I don't take phone calls when I'm with somebody else,
Yeah.
but I do sometimes have my phone on the table. And it's interesting that she cites some of the studies they've done that indicate that has a real effect on people, that it affects people's ability or willingness to be more intimate. In other words, if you put your phone down there and people know that you're going to divide your attention, the conversation tends not to go into the deeper realms of human interaction and things, important topics and things. It tends to stay more superficial. There have been a lot of studies, apparently, at least according to Sherry Turkle, that demonstrate that. So I think that, and this, to me, this is kind of the heart of the book. What effect is our technology having on us in our relationships? Now, you share your intolerance with people who are not going to pay attention to you. They're going to pay attention to their phones. Um, I don't like that. I don't really do that as a practice. If something does come up, I'll excuse myself. I'll ask, hey, listen, I need to take this call. Just give me a second, and acknowledge the other person. But the
Yeah.
people, we all know, and I know people like this who just, they just they just take the call like I'm not even there. Uh, People like that are not safe people. People like that are really, and that this is the problem that I think she's focusing on in this book, is what that does to us, how that divided attention and the fact that, you know, where we get our life from, or where we perceive our relationships are online, distances us from the people that we're actually in the room with. And I think that's really one of the core issues she's dealing with in this book.
Like when I grew up in Australia and then we moved to California when I was 11, and I developed a lifelong habit where I suddenly just became absolutely obsessed with all the people I left behind, and I'd write them long letters. Like I was just, you know, really, I guess, missing them and writing really long letters, and so I would get obsessed, and then that still comes over me. It's like, oh, what happened to that person I knew in 10th grade? Or what about that person I fell out with when I was 19? Or I wonder what's happened to, you know, this person I knew when I was 30. So I will become obsessed with past relationships, and I know that that's like a signal that I'm not as presently engaged with other people as I should be. So a person in the chat says an obsession is an obsession. It could manifest in obsession with technology, or it could be an obsession with just thoughts that you're having that are preventing you from connecting. So I think that's a good point. Obsessions are obsessions, and technology is one way that these obsessions can manifest that can get in the way of smooth interactions with other people. So here's the bottom line, Richard. I think that her book applies in a telling way to 40% of the population. The 40% of the population are particularly prone to various addictions. And then the other 60% of the population, I think it does not apply to as severely. What do you think?
I'm not sure I'd venture out on a statistic like that, but I can't say for certain, because I'm gonna sort of uh, decline to step into that arena. But you may be right. I think I'm interested enough in this, because what really interests me in this whole thing is what people are willing to do to improve their ability to relate to one another, and the importance that I think that has, and the um, threat that um, artificial intelligence, the internet, texting, all of these different technological tools can be to that. Now, I do think it's true that there are some people who are inclined to abuse those things, and they're gonna have problems with it. And a lot of people are kind of normies when it comes to how they use technology. I think you and I are probably, I would say we're more on the normie side in terms of how we use technology. Maybe I'm being overly gracious to both of us, but you know, um, it doesn't keep me from having the kind of relationships I want. I have a good marriage. I have friends. You know, I make time for the people in my life that matter to me, and I think that's a healthy choice. One of the things that there was a study that was done, and this is very telling. I'm gonna just quote this from here. The mean number of people with whom Americans can discuss matters important to them dropped by nearly 1/3, from 2.94 people in 1985 to 2.08 in 2004. Those researchers also found that the number of people who said they had no one with whom to discuss such matters more than doubled to nearly 25%. The survey found that both family and non-family confidence dropped, with the loss greatest in non-family connections. So now that's one study, and that doesn't conclude anything. But I've heard enough other reports of the fact that most people don't have friends. People used to have 5 or 6 close friends. Now they maybe have one or two, if they even have those. And one of the questions that interests me about this book is how much of that is related to how we use technology. In other words, how much of it do we spend or some people spend their time, playing games in an addictive way, or spending time on Facebook, making Facebook friends, superficial relationships that really don't, aren't sustaining. One of the things that she talks about, and I'll say this, he was talking about a young man who texting makes it possible for this guy to have a conversation in which he does not have to hear the sound of a voice he finds irritating. He has a way to make plans with his cousin during the summer without sharing any pleasantries or showing any interest in her. And he later goes on to say, and she mentions that she's heard this in a number of cases, that young people today are afraid of the telephone because they're afraid of having a real conversation because they don't know how to do it. Because they spend most of their time in what they believe is communication via text and via Facebook and via the internet, and the thing she points out, and I agree with this, is that on Facebook you construct a persona. It's not you. It's the you want people to see. Now, is that in itself inherently a bad thing? No, I think we all have always done that. I think that's as old as humankind. But the way that the technology presents that to us is you can literally get so submerged in that, so submerged in that you can forget there's a real world out there pretty quickly.
Yeah, so
He cites a lot of examples of that.
right. So I see these problems by and large as symptoms rather than the underlying core issue, because I just know so many functional people who don't have these problems in a severe way. And so what I would see is that a more diverse America, you're going to have fewer friendships, because if you can't speak the same language as the people around you, you're not going to be friends with them. If the people around you are of a different religion, you're going to be less likely to be friends with them. The more you have in common with people, the more likely you are to be friends with them. So I think a more diverse America is making it more difficult to build friendships and communities. But people who belong to a church or a synagogue or a mosque or a 12-step program, or who are dedicated to their profession or to their education, by and large, I see these people as having friends. What I'm stunned about is so many people I know who live without community. And I think this living without community is not primarily about technology. There are all sorts of people that I encounter, which I find stunning. They don't want to live in community, because living in community is difficult. It is challenging because other people will know your business, and the community is going to importune on you at times. So I think this comes down to, particularly on the West Coast, we're talking on the West Coast. On the East Coast, traditional ties of religion, ethnicity, and schooling are much stronger than they are on the West Coast. But I'm stunned by the number of people who just don't want to live in community, and I think that's what's driving a lot of the loneliness. Richard?
I wholeheartedly agree 100%. This is a little another piece I dropped out of there. It was early in the book. She's talking about this woman in her mid-20s confided that she would trade in her boyfriend for a sophisticated Japanese robot if the robot would produce what she called caring behavior. She told me that she relied on the feeling of civility in the house. She did not want to be alone. She said, if the robot could provide the environment, I would be happy to help produce the illusion that there is somebody really with me. She was looking for a no-risk relationship that would stave off loneliness. A responsive robot, even one just exhibiting scripted behavior, seems better to her than a demanding boyfriend. I asked her gently if she was joking. She told me she wasn't. And I think that illuminates exactly what we're talking about. And this was kind of the driver for me to read this book, is to kind of get a better handle on what role technology plays in this, or what part technology plays in this. And I think I'll agree with you, and I said I agree wholeheartedly, and I'll tell you why. Because I think the way we use technology is a symptom, it's not the problem. And the problem is our fundamental inability to relate to each other and the diminishing willingness to do so. And what's particularly frightening about technology is just what you see in this comment, because she has a lot of interaction with, you know, roboticists and people who are building robots to do precisely that. In other words, to fill in where other people don't. I mean, you know, they have, you know, $200,000 sex robots in Japan that some of these men prefer to having a wife, because the robot does exactly what they want when they want it, and
Right,
that's what people
but
want. And that's pathology. I'm sorry, I consider that a pathology.
yeah, but are these men otherwise healthy guys? And this is just, you know, this one weird tick. I mean, is this woman who'd prefer a robot to a boyfriend or a husband? Is she otherwise, you know, all there? And this is just one weird tick? Heck no. These people are, you know, fundamentally broken. I mean, no normal person operates this way. And this is just one manifestation. But if you looked at these people, you'd find 53 freaky things going on in their life. Now, you can have an orgasm with a sex robot, and you can have an orgasm with your spouse, but the emotional connection and energy that comes from it from those interactions are going to be very different. Richard.
Oh, without a doubt. But what I think is fascinating about this book is she explores it on a positive and negative side. I think her strong opinion is that we need to relate to each other, and that's vastly more important than mimicking or simulating relationships that robots can do, and that can do very, very well. They're particularly good at mimicking our emotions, because the fact of the matter is, here, let's put it this way. Here's one of her quotes. The robotic performance of emotion might exist in its own category, implies nothing about the authenticity of emotions being performed. And robots do not have emotions that we must respect. We build robots to do things that make us feel as though they have emotions. Our responses are their design template. So, you know, there are some very clever people designing machines to respond to us the way we want to be responded to. And I know enough about, you know, my own struggles with having relationships and addictions to know that, you know, what we want, like this young woman who prefers a robot to a boyfriend, because the boyfriend's unpredictable. You know, the fact is, the truth about life is that life is difficult, it's full of suffering, it's unpredictable, and that's real life. Anything else, you know, quoting Wesley from The Princess Bride, life is pain. Anybody who tells you different is selling something. I think that applies here. And I think there's a lot of, you know, companies that want to sell us, you know, machines and robots that you know, meet our vulnerabilities, our human vulnerabilities, with something that's safer than the risk of real relationship. And, you know, that's a topic of great interest to me. How do we train each other, train ourselves, and then train each other in the willingness to be fully human, which means doing the hard work of being patient with other people by learning who we are, seeing our own fallibilities and realizing that everybody else has them. And that, of course, produces a level of patience and tolerance that you wouldn't have otherwise. But if you haven't done that work, you're not going to be tolerant. And I don't know what the percentage of people who haven't done that work. You said you think it's 60% are normal and 40% are not. If I were going to go out on a limb, I would say it's probably more skewed the opposite way. But I don't know that for a fact, and so I sort of declined to.
Well, I'm just using the statistics often given for secure attachment. So people with secure attachment are generally estimated to comprise about 60% of the population, and the other 40% have distracted or insecure attachment, or they're avoidant. So because people are wired to connect, if they don't connect naturally with other people, they're going to have to connect with something, be it a substance or a process. So if these surveys are accurate that about 60% of the population has secure attachment, then I'm talking about 60% who's not going to be, you know, weirdly and destructively obsessed with technology. And this reminds me of an essay I read a couple of weeks ago by a plain overweight feminist who was 38 years of age, and she was writing, "Why are young men so scared of sex?" And she's complaining that sexting has taken the place of sex. And she doesn't even consider that young men are simply afraid of sex with her or not particularly interested in her, that they will sext with her based on meeting her on an app, but they're not particularly interested in her. If it was someone who's younger and hotter and more compelling and more easygoing, then they'd be much more down. So as far as this we are fearful of intimacy, well, I'm fearful of intimacy with many people. I don't want to be intimate with them. I want very little to do with them. I only want to have, basic interactions with them. So some of this fear of intimacy, we need to be exercising good judgment with whom we try to develop intimacy. But for people I know who've grown up in, functional homes with siblings, they generally seem to naturally incline towards relationships with others, and then there are just some people who are really struggling in this area. And so Sherry Turkle writes, "We'd rather text than talk." Well, sometimes it is more appropriate to text than to talk. I had a sponsor, and she did not like text. She did not have texting, and so it made it a real pain. I had to call her if I ever needed to reschedule an appointment or didn't show up. It would be much more efficient to just text. There are some transactions that are far better done on text than over the phone. And as far as intimacy, we don't want to be having deep intimacy with, indiscriminately. Like some people try to get far more from, say, work relationships than is appropriate. So those are some of my thoughts. Anything you want to react to?
Well, you bring up a really good point, is that texting really does sort of represent more of a transactional form of communication. What we're doing right now is having a conversation.
Yeah.
That requires thought, that requires engagement, that requires, some preparation, there's a lot of things. And we both are bringing pretty much our whole selves to this and giving our whole selves to this. And that's fantastic. If we're, and, you can't do that with everybody all the time. Of course not. And, I know for me, I agree with you. For me, it's like, I like to text back and forth on transactional information. Like what time we meeting, when do we do that? And people are busy, and you hear it in program a lot. Text me before you call so I know who it is. Because the truth of the matter is, I don't want to take a phone call with somebody that I don't want to talk to. And if it's a program person, there can be a little conflict because I might care to do that. Maybe I might want to because I'm concerned about the person, which, but for me, I found it better to use. And see, this, I think technology needs to grow up. She does say that, but she focuses more on the research and the problems she's found, which, and that's her role, because that's kind of what she's been doing. But I think it's very useful to text when all you need to do is communicate. Like I text my wife, "Hey, I'm on the way home." Okay, I'll talk to her when I get home. I want her to know that I'm on the way home. Or she'll text me and say, "Hey, could you pick something up?" Or I'll text her, and say, "Hey, I'm at Ralph's. Do you need me to pick something up?" Whatever. All those kind of things. Those are purely transactional. What Sherry Turkle in the book kind of focuses on is, and again, we don't have to necessarily determine what the percentage is, but she's focusing on the percentage of people who are dysfunctional around this more, I think, than on the percentage of people who are using technology in a more healthy way. I mean, I think there's still things that can be troublesome.
Right, and of course we don't always see ourselves, and problems can pop up. Just like I mentioned, I really didn't want to spend the last 15 minutes of my time on this earth with my father obsessed with my phone and why it wasn't getting a connection. I'm not proud of that. And there are other times when, yeah, suddenly there'll be an unhealthy element to my relationship to tech that I didn't see before. But there's just so many benefits to it as well. I mean, Facebook is a wonderful way for reconnecting with people from childhood or just staying in touch with acquaintances. I mean, I use Facebook to log in to a ton of websites so I don't have to remember my password. So if you're using the tech rather than the tech using you, perhaps that's an important difference.
Now, it's probably worth remembering that she wrote this book in 2010. And, it's now 2021. I listened to a talk she did about 3 years ago at Google. And, her focus is now on building people's capacity for real conversations, which actually is kind of aligned with what I'm actually interested in personally. Is how do you you got to do the hard work of doing your PhD in your own humanity. You have to do that work in a complex world like that we live in now. It doesn't happen by accident. Left to itself, all that will happen is you'll get problem after problem that you won't know what to do with, and pretty soon the garden of your life is full of weeds, and it's overtaking everything else. So you have to deliberately, systematically cultivate the things that you want in your life, and equally deliberately and equally systematically remove those things that you don't. To me, that's what 12 steps all about. And I guess now that I'm having the discussion and realizing that I don't know, really in a way that I'm comfortable saying, what percentage of people suffer with this, or what percentage of this people have minimal struggles, what people have big struggles, what is that spectrum, of how people deal with this. I think that's something that's going to become of more interest to me than it
Yeah,
has.
but again, I think it's overwhelmingly a symptom. I don't think, generally speaking, people need particular education on the appropriate ways of dealing with tech. Once you start having normal relationships, these problems will sort themselves out.
I'm not talking about tech. No, I'm not talking about tech. I'm
Yeah.
talking about being how what the tech and the misuse of tech is a symptom of. That's how do you acquire wisdom?
How do you acquire wisdom? I mean, I think the number one answer for most people would be not blocking it from from entering your life. I mean, life is trying to teach you every day, and the more that you can just drop your barriers to learning the lessons that life is trying to hammer you with, then you will acquire wisdom. And then sometimes for some people, that 40%, they're going to have to make special efforts going to therapy or a 12-step program. I think for most people, if they can simply let down their guard, their idea deflector shield, I think most of the wisdom that they need will flow on them.
I'm not sure I agree with that altogether. And part of the reason I disagree, or might be, I'm not going to say I disagree. I'm going to sort of take well, that might be true. You might be right about that. But with the experience I've had in really coming to terms with, how complex it is to be human, and the interactions I have with all kinds of different people, I see these deficits in most people, in more than 40%. But now, the 40% that we're talking about, if we're going to use that, are people who really have difficulties, who need therapy, who need, who need antidepressant drugs or this and that sort of thing. How do we deal with that? I think that is probably more on the extreme side, but I take the I want to stand on the premise that to really be fully who we are, you do have to do this, even if you're not suffering with major problems, because it's sort of like looking at it this way. Okay. If your car's in the ditch, you got to dig it out of the ditch. Okay. But if your car's just in the garage, you got to take it out and drive it. And to get the most out of it, you have to know how to maintain it. You have to know how to maintain it properly. And one of the things we see, for example, in American medicine, is that most people don't take care of themselves. They wait till they hit a crisis. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. What would society look like? And forgive me for being somewhat idealistic. What would society look like if more people said, "Okay, I'm not just going to settle for just surviving. What would thriving really look like? What would I have to do to quote the army phrase, be all that you can be?" And that's certainly one of the things that in Under Earners Anonymous we talk about. How do you live that full, prosperous life that we all, deep down know we want and try to pursue, and some of us do it successfully, and a lot of us, run into walls that we don't know how to circumvent. And most of those walls, in my experience, aren't the fact that life doesn't want to present those things. Most of that is we have to learn life lessons in order to be able to do that. And like you said, if you're listening, you can acquire the wisdom to be able to do that. I question what the percentage of people who actually listen to that wisdom is, or who are actually seeking that is. I think it's lower than I think you credit people with.
I heard once that there are different types of marriages. Some marriages are united by, say, personal growth. That you're both wanting to grow and be all you can be. But a lot of other marriages are legacies, that you want to leave a legacy behind, such as children. So I would expect that most adults who are married have children, and therefore you're going to be so busy. You're going to be so busy paying for your kids, keeping up at work, spending time with your children, spending time with your community, spending time with your friends, maybe having a little bit of time to pursue your hobbies, that I think you and I have far more time to engage in personal growth and spiritual growth and these things than most people do, because most people have perhaps far more obligations than we do. And so we get to be all into the personal growth.
Well, okay, that's an interesting perspective, and I think there's some merit in that. And I think to try to raise children to be good human beings, you can't give away what you don't have. And I can certainly think of plenty of families and plenty of friends where the kids are all a wreck because the parents did exactly what you described.
Yeah,
Because they did.
I don't think parents really matter that much for how kids turn out. I think kids are primarily the result of their genetics and their peer group. So aside from helping to select a child's peer group by, say, choosing where you're going to live or where you send the kids to school, I don't really think parents make that much of a difference in how kids turn out. What's your perspective?
um, Adamantly disagree. The first 5 years of your life are what determine your emotional language. That's the way that you enter life, and we get that from our families, and in particular from our parents, um, for better or for worse. And sometimes it's for the worse, and sometimes it's for the better. But that's an argument that educators like to bring. Oh, parents are irrelevant. We don't need them anymore. We can take over raising children because we'll do a much better job. But the fact of the matter is, good parenting means that you love your spouse. You set that example in the household of a loving spouse, and then you turn that and then you teach your children, your progeny, how to do the same thing. Now, I happen to be in a church setting where I've seen that work, and I see that the fruit of that over marriages that work really well over 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And I see the kind of people they are and the kind of children they have. And these are people who are very dedicated to the kind of personal growth I'm talking about and have put in the time. And on the contrary, I see people in program who try to do all the things you described, and because they're not all right inside, and because they don't have those you know those life skills, those good life muscles. That's why they're in program. That's why they ended up that way. So and I'm sure you have a pretty wide spectrum there, and different people are going to fall at different places along that spectrum. There's no one demographic that kind of incorporates everything. I think you've got a whole spectrum of different things that are going on. But here's what is one of the reasons I wanted to focus on the technology part of this, is that the fact that we're going to be dealing with technology that's much more engaging to us and much more. Here, I'll put it this way: the guy who invented the iBo, which is like a pet, like a robot dog, which is very lifelike. Have you ever seen one? I don't know if you did. Have you seen any of the robots she talks about in that book?
No.
Like iBo or Furby. If you haven't seen those, take some time and look at those, because it kind of brings a perspective to this, and to what is really coming in terms of the kind of technology we create and how we'll interact with it. But this is on the pro side of technology, and I happen to be pro technology. I think it's a tool. We use our tools. We don't let our tools use us, and that I completely agree with you. But here, this guy John Lester imagines that robots will change the course of human evolution. In the future, he says, we won't simply enjoy our tools. We will come to care for them. They will teach us how to treat them and how to live with them. We'll evolve to love our tools. Our tools will evolve to be lovable. Now, that's a guy who builds robots that cause emotional reactions in people, that cause people to want to take care of them. That's that iBo is a little pet dog that you want to take care of, and if you don't take care of it, it gets sick. It responds to not being cared for as well as it responds to being cared for. Now, I think one of the interesting aspects of this is that as we do this, as we explore all these kind of things, I think personally that this is going to engender the need for a deeper kind of introspection, a deeper understanding of who we are and how we operate and what causes us to think the way we do, act the way we do, and how we can actually learn to do that better. I think this is going to produce quite a bit of that over the next 100 years.
Now, I'll just give two reasons why I don't buy that parents shape children nearly as much as most people think. Number one, identical twins raised apart in separate homes, they have very similar life results. So even though they've been raised in completely different homes, they have the same life results. Also, there's no statistical evidence for any type of parenting that produces statistically significant results. So there may be evidence coming down the track, but those are the two reasons why I'm skeptical. And then we're getting to a second point, that is there any true self that, say, interacts with technology or interacts with other people? And from my readings in sociology and moral philosophy, I'm coming to the conclusion, no, there is no true self. I don't have a true self. I am who I am when I'm talking to you. I am who I am when I'm talking to Jeff. I am who I am in a work situation. I am who I am doing a YouTube show. That there are just different facets of me that are brought out by different situations. But when I'm running late, I am going to be much more just bottom line and much less patient in my dealings with people. I'm going to be much more abrupt. The more competition that I'm under, the much more likely I am to be spiteful. So when I'm happy and calm, I'm unlikely to be spiteful. But if I'm competing for my survival or for my job, then I'm going to be much more likely to be spiteful. So if there's no true self, then there's no moral character. So there's the politician who is a faithful public servant at work, but then in his private life, he's got 7 different mistresses, and it's not astounding because people are always going to be different in every situation. So I contend to you, Richard, there's no true Luke, that there's just Luke in different situations. And I ask you, is there a true Richard?
So how do we determine what builds good relationships and what doesn't? What criteria do we use to do that?
I can give you a precise answer. One is the ability to have a shared focus of attention, and two, it's an ability to be in rhythm. There.
Okay. And how do you do that?
Oh, well, you have to have to have a shared focus of attention. So we're discussing something. So if I'm not listening to you, if I'm just simply waiting for you to finish saying what you're going to say, and then because I'm just all thinking about what I want to say, then you're going to not feel very good, and I'm not going to feel very good, and the audience is not going to feel good. It's going to be a herky-jerky show. So it has to be a desire to have a shared focus of attention. And then two, it's the ability to be in rhythm with the other person. So in a normal conversation in the Anglo world, when one person stops speaking, there's about 0.1 of a second until the other person starts speaking. So in Anglo society, that's kind of the norm. If you're constantly interrupting each other, or if there are long pauses in the conversation, you're not in rhythm. So it's both the desire and then the capacity to hold a shared focus of attention and to be in rhythm with the other person. If you can do that, you will produce emotional energy from the interaction, and you will bond. And out of that bond will come a feeling of righteousness and a moral upshot.
Well, I would agree that the concept of what righteousness is that being in right relationship with other people. The thing we find is that, if you are discontent with the job you have and you want to go out and, sabotage one of your coworkers in order to get their job because you think that's a better job, and you do a good job of that, what do you say about that?
Oh, it depends on the context. Again, it's situational. If I've got $50,000 in the bank and I don't care about the job, then if I go out and sabotage other people when I'm not under that severe pressure, then it indicates, one sort of predisposition. But sabotaging other people, let's take that context again. Let me think about it more freely. So you're in a job and you're sabotaging your competitors on the job. Is that the scenario that you're describing?
Well, let's take that one just for the sake of discussion. Sure.
Okay, so let's make it even more specific. You're sabotaging your coworkers who are competing with you to not get fired.
Right.
Okay, so there we got a really specific situation. So you're under a lot of pressure and let's also posit that you really, really want and need to keep this job, right? So you're under a lot of pressure that you will lose your home. You could very well lose your family, and your child is not going to get the medical care that your child needs. So under that situation, I would say to you, Richard, that the situation will be far more determinative of how spiteful and how willing you are to sabotage other people than whatever your purported moral character is. In many of these situations, the situation is going to be more determinative than the individual and their moral character.
Well, that may be true for people who don't place a value on living on a moral basis. In other words, preferring positive and healthy relationships to ones that aren't. I would agree with that, and I think we see plenty of situations where situational ethics are applied over and over again. I don't find that society is better off for that. I find society is worse off for that.
So what percentage of people in that situation that you outlined, where you're in danger of getting, some of you are going to lose your job. To save your job, you are incentivized to sabotage your coworkers so that you can preserve your home, preserve your marriage, and get the medical care that your sick child needs. I would say that 95% of God-fearing Christians and Jews would sabotage their co-workers in that extreme situation. people who think of themselves as righteous and godly. Because the situation is so strong. What's your, I mean, think of yourself. If I was in that situation, I would sabotage. I would not be righteous enough to deal righteously with my coworkers in that situation. If you're in that situation where you're trying to preserve your marriage, preserve your home, and get the medical care that your sick child needs, how confident are you that you would not engage in sabotaging behavior to save yourself?
I would be dishonest if I said I'm absolutely certain that I wouldn't consider that. That's true. But this to me is where faith actually matters. This is where faith and morality sort of meet. You know, if we, and I think this goes back to something we were talking about earlier, in that how we use the technology is a reflection of who we are. And in other words, if we're not healthy on the inside, okay, then we're going to misuse the technology. Where is it real, or where is it written that the way that let's say you go about sabotaging that your coworkers to get that means that you're putting the value of that job over the value of people and relationships?
No, you're putting the health of your child and the survival of your marriage over coworkers. Remember, there were consequences. You're in danger of losing your job, which would cost you your marriage and the health of your child.
Perhaps, but my experience bears out that when you engage in moral action, then my experience is God goes to work and presents me with a better situation that I think that I would have by striving for that and damaging other people. That's been my experience. And so on that basis, I say, I think I would make the case that making a moral choice, though it may not be the easier choice, or it may be what appears to be the riskier choice, in the long run sets you in a better place, puts you in a better place with the relationships, puts you, because, we've all heard this story, if you're climbing the corporate ladder, you're going to see the same people on the way down that you did on the way up. And that's true.
So do you remember the last time you were in a very competitive situation, and you recall what your behavior was like in that very competitive situation? So I'm assuming you've created a life today where it's been a long time since you've been in a very competitive situation where it felt like your very survival was at risk.
There have been times when I felt my survival's at risk, and it's usually been an exaggerated, it's usually catastrophizing. It sort of falls into the category of what Mark Twain said. He said, in my life, I've suffered many terrible things, a few of which actually happened. We tend to think things are going to be far worse than they actually end up being. Something my sponsor told me all the time. He says, if you can accept the worst case scenario from the standpoint, just like as a spiritual act of saying, if that's what happens, that's what happens. I can accept that. I don't have to be in this, turmoil around that.
Okay.
Most of the time that is in fact not what happens, and most of the time that attitude is what opens the door for what's right for me. That's been my experience. So, the way I would look at that situation is if that's the right job for me, then I don't have to strive for it or struggle for it or damage other people to get it, even though those risks that you mentioned are there, because my relationship with God tells me that God will provide for me the things that I need. And that has been the way I have lived. And that is, that's the testimony I have. I found that to be true. And I found that to be true consistently over and over and over again.
Okay. Half Galatian says in the chat, everyone has ethics till they get punched in the face. And then Josh Randall, super chats, $10. Thanks, Josh. Screw relationships. It's all about money and power. Buy Dogecoin and hold. LOL. And then Josh says, spiritual schmiritual, make that paper for the win, FTW. But Richard, what in you is a true self that would hold across all circumstances the best of your knowledge? Because there's nothing in me. I'm sorry?
I don't think, I agree with you. I don't think there is one. In fact, the truth is, I'm nothing.
Right, because you're going to be different in every situation. Well, if you're different in every situation as I'm different in every situation, then moral character is meaningless because we're different in every situation. So in some situations, you're going to come out swinging with your fists. In other situations, you're going to be meek and mild. Other situations, you're going to be the take charge, charismatic leader. In other situations, you're going to be awkward and bumbling. In other situations, you're going to be the smooth dude.
And that means that there's no morality?
No. It doesn't mean there's no morality. It means that there's no moral character for the individual because you're different.
Well, that's actually what you're suggesting, is that there is no morality. It's only the situation that matters. That's I think that's the implication of what you're saying. I don't know if that's what you mean. That's what I'm taking it to mean.
No, there's no moral character for the individual because he's always going to be different. There's still morality. Now, there's Christian morality, there's Jewish morality, and morality can be both absolute and situational because it's the situation that determines the absolute. You would hold that lying is wrong, and many Christians in particular will hold that lying is always wrong. But I think if I gave you an extreme situation where, a man's, running down the street with a machete, intent on hacking up, some kids, and he asks, which way did the kids go? To me, the situation dictates that the moral thing to do is to lie to that guy with the machete. So there's no contradiction in my understanding between ethics that are both determined by the situation. So they're both situational and absolute. If you believe in God, you try to do the right thing in every situation, but what's the right thing in every situation is going to depend on the situation. So I believe in God, and I believe that God would want me to lie to the man with the machete who's intent on doing harm to children.
Yeah, that's a good example. And, quite frankly, there's plenty of examples of that in the Bible. Not that they're always commended, but they're there. And so, that is part of life. You're right, that we do have, what is the greater good? And I'd say saving the lives of children is probably, the value of life in that case probably supersedes, whether you're going to lie to someone who is completely depraved at that moment in time. So,
right.
Yeah,
so there's no inherent difference between situation and absolute. The situation determines the absolute. You can still believe in God, Christianity, Judaism, and the God says right and wrong, but also understand that the situation is going to determine, what is the moral thing to do.
Well, now that's you're right, and that brings up a very interesting area of that. Is that most people read the Bible like a rule book. It's not intended to be a rule book. It's intended to engender exactly the kind of discussion and soul searching and situational perception that you're talking about. That's actually what it encourages. Now, it does have, very clear, guidelines as to, what course you want to take and what course you don't want to take. Okay. But my experience is people who become dogmatic and take it as a set of rules tend to create more problems than the people who approach that with humble inquiry. Like, what's really going on here and what really needs to happen? And how do I apply that? Because you're right about one thing, and I agree about one thing, is that individuals and individual circumstances are unique. General business advice is almost never good for specific business problems. And I think that's what often religious people fall into that trap. Is that, well, the Bible says this, and then just that's how it is, and that really sort of short stops the real thoughtful consideration and exploration that I think is really actually required. Now, in the situation where you have a guy with a machete and he's trying to defend some kids, and he says, "Which way did the kids go?" Well, I don't know. I think they went that way, and of course he knows they went a different way. Okay, that subterfuge, would be done in the moment. You wouldn't have time to consider that, but you could recognize that lying to this guy is probably not as bad as letting those kids get killed, and that's a moral choice.
Okay, here are a couple of sentences from Sherry Turkle's book. People are lonely. The network is seductive, but if we are always on, we may deny ourselves the rewards of solitude. And I got to admit, I leave an Audible book running all night most of the times because I have problems with sleeping. And so if I just go to bed, I will become anxious, and that will hurt my ability to sleep. So I just leave Audible books running just all night and just go in and out of sleep. And so maybe she's writing about me. I mean, here, maybe I've got a problem. It just seems to work for me better to have an Audible book running than to be alone with my thoughts. My thoughts are like a dangerous neighborhood I don't want to enter alone. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I hear you on that. I hear you on that. I think if I have any takeaways from here is that, Sherry Turkle has a perspective. It's not the definitive, this is how it is. It's a perspective. And I think in some respects it's a useful perspective, but it's lacking in some things too. And, technology is here to stay. It's not going away. We're going to have to deal with it. Man learned how to control fire, and all of our technologies kind of emerged out of that capacity, which is a very interesting conversation in and of itself. But yeah, I'm just looking for a way to kind of maybe wrap this up and kind of anchor it in something that's helpful.
Okay, I'll play an excerpt here. You won't hear it, but you can just jump in whenever you gather your thought.
Yeah, no, here, let's do this. Listen, let's keep that. I want to just throw this out here. Immersed in simulation can be hard to remember all that lies beyond, or even to acknowledge that everything is not captured by it. You're talking about, different types of simulations, whether that's with a robot, whether that's going to be with immersive, virtual reality technology and all those kind of things, which are coming, which we cannot avoid. And I think you're right. And I very much agree with you that the misuse of technology is a symptom. Technology isn't at fault. And I think that same thinking applies back to, situational ethics. The situation isn't at fault. It's what's going on inside of us that matters most. And, in any choice I make, I have to be able to live with myself. And, I make good choices and bad choices. And I think part of acquiring wisdom is making choices, and maybe making some bad ones, learning from those how to make better decisions, and then, being gentle with myself after I make some bad ones, because I'm going to.
Okay, Richard, maybe you want to talk a little bit about your YouTube channel, what people can find there. I've linked to it.
At this point, I'm working with a group to launch the book that I've been working on. I'm really sort of holding off doing anything new on my website or on my YouTube channel until I kind of get a handle on that. And that's I'm starting that tomorrow, so I'm very, very excited about that. But I in the next few weeks I'll be starting to post some new talks.
Okay, great. Well, it sounds like you need to roll, so I might just solo stream for a little while. So thank you, Richard, for
Did
taking the time to
you
talk to
have
me.
did you have anything further you wanted to go on? Because I think we touched on some parts of this book, but the one thing I really that I think is important to mention is that technology is as much as it is a problem, it's also an incredible opportunity for us to grow as human beings. And the essence of it is, how do we hold and treat our humanity? And I think we've touched on that in a variety of different ways. And so I'm grateful for that conversation.
Okay, I'll just read a little bit more from her book. We can heal ourselves by giving others what we most need. That really speaks to me, because I remember in therapy, many years ago, I said to my therapist, sometimes I go to synagogue and I wonder if anyone here cares about me. And my therapist had a great response. You care about anyone there? And I didn't. So yes, we can heal ourselves by giving other people what we most want. And we live in an attention economy. I mean, we are constantly competing for attention, and just giving people some attention can be both healing for oneself and for others. Any thoughts?
Well, you mentioned in some of your earlier notes that you shared with me that we get to be selective about who we pay attention to, and that is probably a good thing to do. But my experience is I have to be pretty intentional about that, about where I place my attention, who I place it with, and it's important to allocate time for human interaction. But it's also good to have. I mean, I love technology. I worked for Sprint for 10 years, and I was a cloud evangelist. Everybody should go into the cloud, and I believe it. I still believe we should do that. I still think technology is a really useful thing, and it's really good. But its usage really reflects who we are, and I think that's where the work is. And I think you nailed that when you said, that's the way we use technology is the symptom. It's not the problem. That I'll agree with.
Yeah, and paying attention to people, it can be really simple. It would mean that when I hear a dramatic difference in the quality of your voice, I pay attention to that and go, Richard, what's going on? Your voice sounds strangled, or you sound triumphant, or I just notice what's going on with you. It means that you notice what's going on with the people around you. You walk into work and someone's like skipping down the hallway. It's like, oh, wow, sounds like, Sarah, you had a great weekend. And then there's Jeff, who's just absolutely looking slumped and defeated. And so he says hi, and you say, wow, Jeff, it looks like you're going through a really tough time. I mean, just acknowledging what's going on with people can make all the difference in the world to them. And it then also improves the quality of your life.
Yeah, well, I think that's, we call that the golden rule. Treat other people the way you want to be treated. That's when life works.
Yeah, and it doesn't take a lot of effort. It just means you get into an elevator with a stranger, and there are things that are just obviously bouncing off you about that person, and just a simple, wow, looks like you're having a tough day, can make such a difference. And it also trains you to attune yourself to others, which can't help but benefit you.
That is true. Yeah, I actually think that's probably a good place to put a bookmark in it at this point.
Okay.
I think this is kind of an ongoing discussion that we've been having, and I so much enjoy it, and I so appreciate your graciousness about doing this and letting me come on and talk with you about this stuff.
Okay, Richard, I'm going to go on solo for a few minutes. Good to talk to you, my friend. Take care.
You bet.
Take care now. Bye-bye. Okay, and we've got a super chat from Josh Randall. Keep it simple and focus on hoes and money. Well, it's context and situation, right? So there are absolutely times in your life when you should put money, as a top priority. And there are times in life when you should focus on getting a spouse, or starting with getting a girlfriend, or even starting with getting a date. But what's going on inside of you is going to have a tremendous effect on your ability to get money and to get a woman. So if if your thoughts are not smooth, you are much less likely to have success with money and with women, right? How are you when you're alone? Are your thoughts smooth? Or are they herky, jerky, disconnected? Are you ill at ease, restless, irritable, and discontented? And if you're restless, irritable, and discontented, then distracting yourself by focusing on achieving money and women, one, you're not going to be very successful. And two, it's not going to cure the hole in your soul. If you've got a spiritual problem, it needs a spiritual solution. And if you are unable to maintain a smooth thought process when you're on your own, you're undoubtedly suffering from, among other things, very low emotional energy. Why are you suffering from low emotional energy? Because your relationships, the people you're interacting with, are not building you up. Some people get a tremendous amount done with their life, and you wonder, wow, that person just seems switched on, and they just go from triumph to triumph, and they get 10 times as much done in a day as I do. If I just think about what they get done in a day, I'm absolutely exhausted. There's no way I could do what they do. Well, what's going on with these super achievers? They're getting energy from all their interactions. They get up in the morning and they've got a vision for their life. That gives them energy. They get up in the morning, they love their spouse and they love their kids, and that gives them energy. They go to work and it's like, hey, Jane, and that brief interaction, hey, Peter, hey, Suze, what's going down? All their interactions are giving them energy. They go into a board meeting, all right, and they get energy from that board meeting. This is compared to other people for whom almost all their interactions are draining them. They wake up in the morning and they think, I hate my spouse, I hate my life. They stumble out to the kitchen and make themselves breakfast, and they see their sullen, surly kids, and they think, I hate my kids. They have a neighbor next door. They see a neighbor through a window, and they think, I hate my neighbors. And then they go to a job, and they hate their job. They hate their boss. They hate the people they're working with. All right? You're just losing energy from all those interactions. But if you like your neighbors, you like your spouse, you like your kid, you like your coworkers, you like your job, you're going to be filled with passion. So we have to build lives where we are consistently replenishing our emotional energy and adding to it. And you do that two ways. You're attuned to the other person, all right? So you're on the same wavelength, right? When Richard says something, I'm listening to what he says, and then so that what I'm saying is taking into account what he just said. That indicates to him that he's important to me and that I'm paying attention to what he's saying, all right? So you have to be attuned on the same wavelength with people, and then you have to be in rhythm. Right, Richard and I aren't constantly talking over each other. On the other hand, there aren't these huge, long pauses in our conversation where it's like, oh, I just don't really have anything. Okay, so you want to be in rhythm. So I speak, he speaks, you speak, he speaks. Back and forth, there should be a rhythm to your interaction. So when you're attuned, where you have a shared focus of attention, right, you're able to pull that off. And then you're in rhythm, then you're going to get emotional energy from these interactions. This emotional energy will be building a bond, right? The more people you bond with and the tighter, closer, and deeper your bonds with other people, the more energized you're going to feel, because then you know that your life matters, because you got people who depend on you. You've got a spouse who depends on you. You've got friends who depend on you. You've got a religious community that depends upon you. You've got 27 workers who depend upon you. You have other people who are just acquaintances who look to you for inspiration. What do we call people who are sources of energy for others? And this can even be people on a live stream who can be a source of energy for you. We call those people charismatic, right? Charismatic people pulsate with energy. They vibrate with energy. When you watch them, listen to them, interact with them, talk to them, you feel energized. You have more emotional energy, and as a result, your own thinking process becomes more smooth rather than disconnected and jerky. Right? People are able to do that for you, provide you with that emotional energy. We call them charismatic. Josh says, my thoughts are all about Instagram booty accounts right now. Richard is a good man, like 40's lawyer, kept 40 out of federal prison. Okay, looking at some more of my notes on Sherry Turkle's book. People are lonely. The network is seductive, but if we're always on, we may deny ourselves the reward of solitude. So I admit There's not much time in my life where I'm not listening to something or reading something or doing something. I don't spend a lot of time just lying back in meditation or prayer. I believe that in our culture of simulation, the notion of authenticity is for us what sex was for the Victorians: threat and obsession, taboo and fascination. Maybe for some people. I don't see this as a generalization. We can heal ourselves by giving others what we most need. Well, yeah, simply take into account what's going on with someone else. Like Josh Randall, he's incredibly horny right now. So, Josh, I acknowledge your horniness. What's the old story? A man had a parrot who would only say one word. The parrot would say, horny. And then at synagogue, he had a friend, his mate Shmuel, who had two parrots. And these two parrots, all they would do was pray back and forth, and they would just recite the whole book of Tehillim, the whole book of Psalms. Like these parrots, these two holy parrots, and they wore their, they had their Jewish regalia, and they would just pray all day. They would just recite Tehillim all day. So our man with the parrot who says, horny, hey, maybe I could introduce my parrot to your parrots, and the holiness that your parrots have got going on, maybe that will rub off on my parrot, because I'm kind of embarrassed that all he does is say the word horny. And so he brought his horny parrot over to the two holy parrots, and they put them in the cage together. And what happened? The two parrots said, our dreams have finally come true. All right, Jewish humor. Back to Cheryl Turkle. We are psychologically programmed not only to nurture what we love, but to love what we nurture. Yes, it's not only that we nurture what we love, but by nurturing and taking care of something we love, it frees up our love. Technology ties us up as it promises to free us up. Connectivity technologies once promised to give us more time, but as the cell phone and smartphone eroded the boundaries between work and leisure, all the time in the world was not enough. Even when we're not at work, we experience ourselves as on-call, pressed. We want to edit out complexity and cut to the chase. Well, I think it depends on the person. I mean, I certainly don't feel this, right? I don't feel like I'm always at work or I'm always on call. I mean, I often have 3 days of Yom Tov, 3 days of Jewish holidays. You don't get a phone call or a text or anything from me. So all sorts of people will call me, email me, text me. They don't get a response from me for up to 3 days, and sometimes their panties get in a knot. But what can I do? Hashem gave me the commandments. I perform the commandments. The commandments say, no use of certain technologies on Shabbat and Yom Tov, so I can't get back to you. But if someone's all twisted out of shape because I haven't gotten back to them in 3 days because I'm fulfilling God's commandments, I mean, that anxiety is on him, right? That's something wrong with him. And if you have your phone set up so that you're getting work emails unnecessarily, or you're getting unnecessary calls, then there's something wrong with you. 99% of the time, I have my phone on Do Not Disturb. Right? My phone never pings, vibrates, and rings except for very rare occasions. So it's not just technology that starts out, promising us, tremendous freedom, and then ends up as a strangling, suffocating straitjacket. I mean, every new development starts out that way. You get a car. It's like, wow, now I've got, feels like limitless freedom. And then the car starts having problems and you have to pay for the mechanic to fix it. And what started out as a massive liberation, it turns into a suffocating straitjacket. Think about the alt-right. Some people discover the alt-right. It's like, oh, wow, this is really freeing. We can say all these things we weren't able to say before, and we can be edgy, and we've got all these new perspectives, and we don't have to go along with the mainstream media. So people's first experience of the alt-right is liberation, and then fairly quickly it turns into a suffocating straitjacket, and so they only see the world through these certain narrow prisms that just strangle them. Other people get into socialism. Starts out as like, oh, this is amazing, major liberation, then turns into a suffocating straitjacket. So everything, like some people discover pornography, it's like, oh yeah, pornography. Like now, life is richer, it's more complex. I'm now finally understanding, I'm knowing, I've got a deep sense of knowing about what really goes on the innards of a woman. And starts out, use of porn or the use of alcohol or the use of cocaine, it starts out as a liberation. Or you might discover nachos and pizza and beer. And it's like, oh, this is fantastic. I'm going to have nachos or pizza and beer, several nights a week. Starts out as a liberation. Then you may put on weight and it becomes a suffocating straitjacket. So every new development that starts out as a liberation, it very quickly turns into a suffocating straitjacket. There's no technological or other political or social or cultural, even religious development that's going to free you, right? Freedom comes when you become centered and at ease with yourself. And then when you're at ease with yourself, that will radiate to other people. I think I'm fairly at ease with myself. I think when you tune into the 40 show that you sense that I'm at ease. I'm at ease with my imperfection. I'm at ease with, shows only getting 11 live viewers. Like, it doesn't ruin my day. Back to Sherry Turkle. A few years ago at a dinner party in Paris, I met Ellen, an ambitious, elegant young woman in her early 30s, thrilled to be working her dream job in advertising. Once a week, she'd call her grandma in Philadelphia using Skype. Before Skype, Ellen's calls to her grandmother were costly and brief. But with Skype, the calls are free and give the compelling sense that the other person is present. Skype is almost real-time video link. That's what it is. Ellen could now call more frequently, twice a week, and I stay on the call for an hour. Should have been rewarding. Instead, when I met her, Ellen was unhappy. She knew that her grandmother was unaware that Skype allows surreptitious multitasking. Grandmother could see Ellen's face on the screen, but not her hands. Ellen admitted to me, I do my emails during the calls, not really paying attention to our conversation. Ellen's multitasking removed her to another place. She felt her grandmother was talking to someone who was not really there. During their Skype conversations, Ellen and her grandmother were more connected than they'd ever been before, but at the same time, each was alone. Ellen felt guilty and confused. She knew that her grandmother was happy, even if their intimacy was now, for Ellen, another task among multitasks. Well, it sounds like Ellen's doing a nice deed. Like, Ellen wasn't calling her grandmother primarily for Ellen's own pleasure. So the problem's not the tech here. The problem is in Ellen's thinking. Strikes me she's doing something lovely and nice and respectful for her grandmother. She has no reason to feel guilty about multitasking. It might be a wonderful world where grandkids just love talking with their grandparents. That's not reality. I mean, there are a lot of people who like to talk to me who I am not interested in talking to. There are a lot of people who want to hang out with me who I don't want to hang out with. There are lots of people who I would like to talk to, or there are people I'd like to hang out with who are not interested in talking or hanging out with me. So this has nothing to do with tech. Right, here's Sherry Turkle.
1978, Michael Turtuzos, who is the head of the Laboratory for Computer Science, held a meeting. It was a several-day retreat at Endicott House, our conference center, in which he assembled the greatest minds in computer science, really at the time, to figure out the question of what people might want to do with what was then called home computers. The word personal computers really hadn't come into the lexicon yet. Now, these were the first computers that you didn't have to build. These were the first computers that you could actually buy. And these great computer scientists got together. I was invited to the meeting because I had begun my studies of computers and people. They got together and they kind of gave it their best shot. Somebody suggested that children might want to learn to program, listen to respectfully, maybe. Somebody suggested that we would want to put our address books on computers, and people laughed and said, well, actually, paper and pencil little books, paper was perfect for that because most people didn't have a database. They had a couple of names and addresses. So that didn't make a lot of sense. Some people suggested, well, a calendar. And actually, people said, well, no, I don't like using the computer for my calendar. I really find little file of facts is much better. You can flip through. It's much more practical. I tell this story because I think it's very important to know, to remember, that really not that long ago, we were trying to figure out how we would keep computers busy. And, now we know that once we networked with each other, once computers were our portal.
Okay, question in the chat from Josh Randall. What if I don't have any substance addictions, but I still obsess on Insta booty accounts? The problem is not the obsession with Insta booty accounts. This is not really your best self here. It's filling a need in you, right? The beauty and the tantalizing sexuality of these Insta booty accounts is meeting a need for excitement, right? We are wired to connect. You're obsessed with Insta booty accounts because of a lack of meaningful relationships in your life, right? We are wired to connect. You're not sufficiently connected, ergo, you have to connect with something. So you're connecting with your fantasies about, these Insta booty accounts. But that's just a manifestation. You could just as easily become obsessed with gaming or with hardcore pornography or gambling, right? But these are all just manifestations of a lack of ease with yourself because you're not sufficiently connected. I mean, we need to be moving through life in a smooth and graceful manner, right? So when we're getting emotional energy from our interactions, where it changes our posture, it changes our voice, it changes our eye contact, changes our manner, and it changes the way we think. We will think in smoother, more contented ways, and we won't need the distraction of Insta booty accounts. So, Josh, you need more emotional energy in your life, bro. How do you get more emotional energy in your life? You become attuned to the people who are important to you, and you get into rhythm with them, and through those interactions, you gain emotional energy, and that smooths out your thinking process and adds a degree of smoothness and grace to your voice and to the way you carry yourself, and carries on throughout your life. It gives you the fuel to do the things that you need to do. So you don't have to try to fill up the emptiness inside with Insta booty accounts. What's wrong with the Bitcoin
Let me explain.
space? All right. So what's wrong with Bitcoin is that most of the claims made for it are just simply not true. Right? It doesn't function as a currency. It's not, super safe and easy, and it's just that most of the claims made for it are exaggerated. So I don't know many smart people who are deeply into Bitcoin. I know a lot of really stupid people are into Bitcoin and Dogecoin and other cyber currencies. So when investments are primarily, I see being carried out by people who are not so bright, then I tend to be suspicious of cyber currencies. So I never thought deeply about cyber currencies until about a month ago. And now I think they're just the equivalent of, just bizarre investments, or investments in art, or in children's toys or tulips.
Let me explain something to you right now. Okay, here's a $10 bill. This is garbage. This is garbage. Your people in South Africa, you have your rand, right? That's going to zero. That's going to zero. This is going to zero too. Euros are going to zero. The yen's going to zero. The Chinese currency is going to zero. It's all going to zero against Bitcoin. If you don't understand that yet, you're going to be impoverished. You're going to be on the street. You're going to be begging. You're going to be out of business. You're going to be toast.
Max, do you know that it's a criminal offense to tear up?
Do you know that with the Bitcoin I have, I can buy any freaking senator or congressman I want? I make the laws. He who has the Bitcoin makes the laws, Rand. We're not going to just sit around and let the goddamn congressman tell us what to do. We've got the capital. We make the laws. We've got the Bitcoin. They don't. We got it. They don't. Do you understand?
That's what this guy sounds like.
Realistically, humiliate them. I am coming back here every fucking weekend if I have to. Like, this is never over. I win, they fucking lose. That's how the world fucking works. Little fucking kites. They get ruled by people like me. Little fucking octoroons. My ancestors fucking enslaved those pieces of fucking shit. I rule the fucking world. Those pieces of shit get ruled by people like me. They look up and see a face like mine looking down at them. That's how the fucking world works. We are going to destroy this fucking...
Okay, so the chat says that's Max Kaiser. It's a shtick to get publicity. Back to Sherry Turkle's book in corporations, among friends, within academic departments, people readily admit they would rather leave a voicemail or send an email than talk face to face. Well, sometimes it's more appropriate to send an email, leave a voicemail. All right, there's nothing wrong with not wanting to talk face to face with some people about some things. I mean, some people I would rather talk to face to face. Then there are other people who aren't that important to me, who I'm not looking to have an I-thou relationship with. And some people are just creepy and dangerous, and I want to be as removed from them as possible. Sherry writes, when part of your life is lived in virtual places, it can be Second Life, computer game, a social networking site. A vexed relationship develops between what is true and what is true here, true in simulation. Look, we're always different people in different situations. What is true here is true even without technology. There's nothing inherently vexing about this. Sherry writes, yet even such simple pleasures bring compulsions that take me by surprise. I check my email first thing in the morning and before going to bed at night. Well, you've developed a bad habit. Like, some people only check their email once a day. I've come to learn that informing myself about new professional problems and demands is not a good way to start or end my day, but my practice unhappily continues. You need more emotional energy, Sherry. I admitted my ongoing irritation with myself to a friend, woman in her 70s who has meditated on a biblical reading every morning since she was in her teens. She confessed it is ever more difficult to begin her spiritual exercises before she checks her email. The discipline to defer opening her inbox is now part of her devotional gesture, and she too invites insomnia by checking her email every night before turning in. So I usually wait about 2.5 hours every weekday morning before checking my emails, and it's not that hard. I got my first cell phone in 1997. I got my first smartphone in 2007. I don't feel that these tools reduce the quality of my life. My tech doesn't run me. I run my tech. I've rarely had anyone complain about my use of them. I've occasionally had women checking their cell phones when I'm talking with them, and I just usually walk away in response. Once we remove ourselves from the flow of physical, messy, untidy life, and both robotics and network life do that, we become less willing to get out there and take a chance. Song that became popular in YouTube in 2010, Do You Want to Date My Avatar, ends with the lyrics, and if you think I'm not the one, log off, and we'll be done. Look, I don't see normal people going this route. Again, this is primarily a symptom, not a cause. In this new regime, a train station, like an airport, a cafe, or a park, is no longer a communal space, but a place of social collection. People come together but do not speak to each other. Well, how much were strangers talking to each other in the old regime? I suspect there's been a difference. Like, I've gone into a park and started talking with strangers. I once went into a park and I picked up these two men. I didn't know they were gay dudes. I was just in a park. I was very lonely. It was when I had pretty severe chronic fatigue syndrome. I was living with my sister in Brisbane, Australia, and a couple of dudes in the park, and I just started talking with them, and then I brought them back to my place, and we were sitting around the table having a conversation, and I found out they were gay. Well, one of the dudes was doing a PhD at the University of Queensland in ethnomusicology, and he was very nice, Chinesey kind of dude, and was a good bloke, right? So, we all live and learn. Look, tell me you've never picked up gay dudes in the park and brought them home. Look, we've all made mistakes, all right? It's the easiest thing in the world. Like, you can just be going for a walk, and the next thing you know, you're picking up two gay dudes and bringing them home. Like, we've all made that mistake. And I don't judge myself. I still love and accept myself, even though I may have misjudged that situation. Well, I didn't even misjudge it. One of them was an ethnomusicologist, man. He was getting a PhD. When people have phone conversations in public spaces, their sense of privacy is sustained by the presumption that those around them will treat them not only as anonymous, but as if absent. Well, yeah, technology and other new developments allows boorish people new ways to be boorish. This is Sherry Turkle.
To being with each other. We really don't have to worry about keeping computers busy. They keep us busy. It's kind of as though we are their killer app. So how does that work? We're on our email, our games, our virtual worlds. We text each other at family dinners, while we jog, while we drive. We take our lives into our hands to do that, even with our kids in the back seat of the car.
Look, we've all walked through a park and ended up gay and fighting HIV. Like, we've all done it. Like, we're all gay and we've all got AIDS and we're all dying of AIDS. I mean, it's just one of those things that happens to men as they, go for walks. I mean, what do you want people to do? Just stay home?
Car. We text each other at funerals. We go to the park and we push swings with one hand and we scroll through our messages with each other. A lot of my research is observing families, and, this is what I see. The children who I interview say that their parents read them Harry Potter, again, with that right hand reading them the book and the left hand scrolling through the messages on the BlackBerry. Children describe that moment at school pickup. They'll never tell you that they care, but they describe that moment where they come out of school, looking for that moment of eye contact. And instead of that moment of eye contact with a parent who, after all, has shown up at school pickup, that parent is looking at the iPhone, looking at the smartphone, and is reading mail. So from the moment this generation of children met technology, it was the competition. And now they've grown up. And today's teenagers, this generation of children who've grown up with technology being the competition.
Really? I mean, that's pathetic if kids are having to compete with smartphones to get their parents' attention. And I have not seen that. In the psychoanalytic tradition, one speaks about narcissism not to indicate people who love themselves, but about a personality so fragile that it needs constant support. It cannot tolerate the complex demands of other people, but tries to relate to them by distorting who they are and spitting off what it needs and what it can use. So the narcissistic self gets on with others by dealing only with their made-to-measure representations. These representations are all that the fragile self can handle. We can easily imagine the use of inanimate companions to such a self, because a robot can be sculpted to meet one's needs, but a fragile person can also be supported by selected and limited contact with people, say the people on a cell phone favorites list. In a life of texting and messaging, those on that contact list can be made to appear almost on demand. You can take what you need and move on, and if not gratified, you can try someone else. And she concludes, in treatment, symptoms disappear because they become irrelevant. Patients become more interested in looking at what symptoms hide, the ordinary thoughts and experiences of which they are the strangulated expression.
They now have their turn to live in a culture of distraction. And what do they tell me? They tell me that they sleep with their cell phones. They begin by saying, well, I use it as an alarm clock, and then they come clean and they say, well, actually, it's not just because I use it as an alarm clock. They want to sleep with it just in case they get a message or they want to communicate. And then they say that even when their phones are put away, let's say relegated to their school locker, they know when they have a message or a call. They feel that they can tell at long distance that they have a message or a call. They say they can just sense it. Indeed, adults as well as teens report that they feel their phones vibrating, even when they are not. This is a well-known phenomenon. It's called the phantom ring. It's been reported all over. When you take our phones away from us, we become anxious. We become impossible, really. Modern technology has become like a phantom limb. It is so much a part of us. So what is the arc of the story that I want to tell? Only 15 years ago, looking at the early internet, I felt an incredible sense of optimism. I saw a place for identity experimentation. I called it an identity workshop for trying out aspects of self that were hard to experiment.
Okay, so she doesn't recommend that you get real freaky there with that experimentation. Like, there's some things, guys, you should not try. There are some things, let's just put it, that you should keep in the closet. Now, due to overwhelming demand, I need to return to a video that I played on Friday, from Soviet communism to Russian gangster capitalism.
Through the collapse. So what I'm going to do here is introduce an analytical schema from the social sciences. This is actually from a famous economist by a development economist by the name of Albert Hirschman, who published this book, Exit, Voice, and Loyalty, in 1970. And he developed a framework for thinking about what happens when, as you can tell from the subtitle, firms, organizations, states decline. How do people respond to decline? And the framework he developed, I think this is, if you read no other book in the social sciences before you graduate, or this is certainly one of the 2 or 3 books you should definitely read. And we will use Hirschman's framework at various points in the course. And so he said, well, if you think about yourself in a declining organization, there are 3 things you can do. One is you can leave, exit. 2 is you can complain and try and get it changed, voice. 3, you can try to fix it yourself. You believe in the cause and you want to make it better. And a lot of Hirschman's analysis says that what mix of exit, voice, and loyalty people engage in is determined by the costs of those things. So for instance, if you think about a public company, if you're a shareholder in a public company and you don't like the way it's being run, you could just sell your shares and buy shares in a different company that you like better, right? So you don't have much incentive to go to shareholders' meetings and trying to get the company, you maybe think it's got too much debt or something. You just buy shares in a company that has less debt. That's all you need to do, just exit. Very low cost of exit. So people are not going to engage in voice. Now, of course, you might care about the company. It might be ostensibly a green company, and you might be holding the shares in the company because of your commitment to green energy. Then you might feel loyalty to the company, and you will want to try and get it changed. Think about yourself as a worker working for a company. If you don't like the way the company's being run, unlike a shareholder, you can't just pick up and leave. You've got, you live in this town, you've got your family, your kids are in the schools and so forth. The costs of exit for you are very high. So you're more likely to engage in voice. You're going to go to meetings, you're going to complain, you might form a union, you're going to do things or join a union. You're going to do things to get the company to change its ways. So his book is an analysis of the ways in which exit, voice, and loyalty might be complementary in some circumstances and might be competitors in some circumstances for the ways in which people respond to the decline of organizations. So the first thing to say about the Soviet Union in the 1980s and 90s is there was a substantial decline, almost disappearance of loyalty among both the elites and the citizens. And I got a first-hand view of this. In March of 1991, there was a Yale...
Okay, so this is an important book. He says one of the top 3 most important books in the social sciences. The book came out in 1970, Exit, Voice, and Loyalty, and Rob Henderson wrote a review of this book. Exit, Voice, and Loyalty, Responses to Decline in Firms, Organizations, and States. And it was written by an economist here, Albert Hirschman. So I want to talk just a little bit about this book.
Delegate invited by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union to a conference in Moscow, actually at the week before the referendum that I mentioned to you earlier. And we had been impressed by Gorbachev and so forth, but we didn't really have much knowledge about, I certainly was no expert on the Soviet Union, and most of the other people in the delegation were not. And we had this stereotypical picture of the KGB shadowing us around and telling us what to do, and we needed to be careful and so on. And the first thing we noticed was widespread evidence of brazen corruption. I'll give just two examples. We were all afraid of what the KGB people might be doing to us. The first KGB person I ran into was trying to sell me currency at black market exchange rates. And then secondly, I went to a reception and somebody came up to me with a translator, and the translator said, "This gentleman wants to speak to you." And he said, "Professor Shapiro, I understand you are South African." This is 1991. Okay, it's before the collapse of apartheid. It's the beginning of the beginning of the collapse of apartheid in South Africa. Mandela is being released from prison and so forth. But the apartheid regime was still there, and it was not clear how it was going to play out. And so this person speaks in Russian, which I speak a little bit now, but I spoke none then. And basically the translator says, "This gentleman wants to know how to if you can facilitate this making a connection with the government of South Africa, because he has access to weapons which he would like to sell to them." And we regard apartheid as a domestic matter. We don't care what's going on in the country, but I can sell all kinds of weapons, including nuclear weapons, which might have been nonsense, but this is quite, this actually...
Okay, so you're asking, wow, this sounds like an amazing book. Give me a brief overview of exit, voice, and loyalty responses to decline in firms, organizations, and states. Such a sexy title. So Albert Hirschman delineates people's options when they are no longer satisfied with their employer, organization, lover, or country. So there are two key options, exit and voice. Exit means leaving, going elsewhere. Voice means expressing your discontent and trying to improve the organization. So under what conditions will the exit option prevail over the voice option, vice versa? So generally, exit is used in economics and business. Voice is used in politics, right? So you can leave and, I guess, turn in your citizenship and become a citizen somewhere else, but generally people don't do that. So in business, a dissatisfied customer of one product can purchase another. That's exit. A voter dissatisfied with politics expresses their unhappiness by voting, or which is, I guess, they can exit, or no, that's voice. So you vote, but you vote for someone else, or you write letters to the editor, you make a video, all right? So an unhappy customer can call a firm or stage a boycott. So that's voice. So voice is messier than exit. Voice is an attempt to change rather than escape from an objectionable situation. So there's a whole continuum of voice ranging from faint grumbling to violent rioting. In the realm of politics, where voice is most likely to be used, there can be negative returns to too much voice. So violent protests, such as with Black Lives Matter and Antifa, tend to reduce support for those social movements. Now, for exit to work as a mechanism of recuperation from decline, it's ideal for an organization to have a mixture of alert and inert members. The exit of alert members provides feedback to the firm. People are leaving. Maybe we should figure out why. And inert members, so people just allow you to keep banging their credit card every month. They provide the firm with time and financial cushion for the recuperation to take place. So people's decisions to exit or not are often determined by the effectiveness of voice. So if you feel like the situation people will listen to, you might be more likely to use voice. If you don't feel like you'll be able to make a difference, then you'll just exit. So the presence of exit reduces the use of voice. So if you leave, you no longer have any voice. Now, exit tends to accelerate decline because those who exit first are usually the most quality, conscious, and resourceful members. So if you feel like your neighborhood's tipping, the smartest people leave first. This is the way that public schools deteriorate. So the most education-conscious parents with the most means pull their kids out of public schools, send them to private schools. Now, public schools might respond by trying to improve their schools, but this response is going to be less effective because the public schools' most concerned and affluent parents have left. The people who care about a product, they're often going to be those who will be the first to exit in response to deterioration. They have options. Why should they stay? So the exit of capable and affluent people will often paralyze the voice that could have been provided. And this applies to dating as well. So attractive and interesting people are much more ready to use exit over voice, right? So the more someone's got something going on with their life, the more that they have resources, the more that they feel their sexual marketplace value, the more likely they are to just exit over voice. Oh, let's talk this out. So if you're a dysfunctional person, if you're an under-earner, if you're an alcoholic, if you're addicted to gaming, you probably have no idea how many people have simply exited your life because they just didn't want to deal with your Narishkeit. So successful, capable people don't want to put up with under-earners, with antisocial types, with losers. So attractive, interesting, capable, successful people, as soon as they spot that someone's a loser, they just get the hell out of there and minimize all interactions with that person. And if you grew up in a bad neighborhood, you're probably never going to move back there if you're a capable person, right? Capable, curious people born into bad surroundings usually opt for exit. And for voice to work, they may well have to first go to graduate school, right? They go to graduate school, they're surrounded by similar people, and they really want to go home. So as travel has become easier and more affordable, more capable people are exiting their communities in search of fulfilling economic, romantic, and social opportunities. So those who have the greatest influence on quality are more likely to leave at the slightest deterioration, which in turn tends to lead to further deterioration, which leads to more exits. So suppose you're living in a crumbling neighborhood. Your community used to be beautiful, but now it's turned into a shanty town. Well, if you have the means, you're going to get out of there. Those who value cleanliness, safety, good schools, they're usually going to be the first to move out of a neighborhood that's exhibiting any signs of decline. So then the neighborhood loses its most quality members, and the neighborhood really goes to pot. So people with resources, people with social mobility, people who are capable and successful, they are much more likely to use exit over voice. Losers are much more likely to complain. All right, so think about those subgroups are always complaining versus those subgroups who are successful, who probably don't complain as much, they just get the hell out. So loyalty is usually irrational, right? So the reason that you're staying is that you feel incredibly loyal. So the more loyal a person is, the less likely they are to exit. And the likelihood of voice increases with a person's loyalty. Devotion to an organization or to a relationship, to a community or a school, suppresses exit, energizes voice. People with a deep attachment to a relationship, a community, a school, a job, will search for ways to make themselves influential to amplify the power of their voice. Now, exit is very much an American tradition. So Americans have historically favored exit over voice. So America was largely peopled by people who ran away from Europe. The United States owes its existence to millions of people choosing exit. So political scientist Louis Hart said, the men in the 17th century who fled to America from Europe were keenly aware of the oppression of Europe. But they were revolutionaries with a difference, and the fact of their feeling is no minor fact, for it is one thing to stay at home and fight. It is another to leave it far behind. It is one thing to try to establish liberalism in the old world, and it is another to try to establish it in the new. So in a real sense, physical flight is the American substitution for the European experience of social revolution. So why haven't we had revolutions in America? Because Americans get up and move. All right, Americans, generally speaking, prefer the neatness of exit over the messiness and heartbreak of voice. And that has persisted through our national history. Why raise your voice and why get into trouble when you can just quietly extricate yourself from the situation? So the traditional American idea of social mobility, right? The successful individual who begins at the bottom then leaves his group, leaves his community as he rises in social class. And the exit by capable people weakens the power of voice for those who leave behind. Exit is not taken for the purpose of gaining more influence. Quite the opposite. People exit when they feel like they no longer have any influence. So as conditions in a society improve, their scope for deterioration increases. So it's the penalty of progress. The better things get, the worse things can get, because as society advances, has a longer way to fall. So economic progress positively correlates with latitude for deterioration. which means that more people feel they must make the crucial decision, voice or exit.
With in the physical real, and all of this happens, and all of this is still wondrous. But what I didn't see coming, and I like to tell my students, call me not prescient. What I didn't see coming, and what we have now, is that mobile connectivity, that world of devices, always on and always on us, would mean that we would be able to basically bail out of the physical real at any time, to go to all of the other places and spaces that we have available to us, and that we would want to. One man I interviewed who plays with his...
And Robert says, look, think of all those wonderful women you're missing out on. What I like about women in their 50s is that right at the get-go, they tell you where you rank. Below their kids, below their dogs, below their friends, below their other family, below their job, and below their career. That's a cheerful thought to end on. Thank you.